Welcome back to another episode of Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble.
And I'm Chris Clements.
And we are coming to you from Washington, D.C. at the CPI offices. And we've got the great Phil Kerpen.
The great.
The great Phil Kerpen.
The great. The almighty.
Well, we were in a meeting a couple of days ago where someone said, last time I was on, I talked the whole time. So I'm going to try to not do that as much as
that's
now.
why
And what did I shout out during that meeting? I said, our guests are our focus.
Yes.
You know, we give our guests are our heroes.
That was a pretty funny moment. We had somebody I had no idea that they listened to the podcast, said, yeah, Phil Kerpen asked one question and he just talked through the whole episode.
Well, that was evidence of your great influence here in Washington. It was a pretty important staffer, actually.
It is important stuff.
Well, some people are listening.
But I think it was you. That was the reason. So thanks for being here, Phil.
Yeah, great to have
Phil
you.
Kerpen's the president of American Commitment, one of the great organizations here in the D.C. Metro. And we've said this before, Phil is literally the smartest person in Washington. So this week we had important vote in the House on what's called the REINS Act. This is something that you've been a part of since the very, very beginning. Tell us the story.
Yeah, this is a bill we've been trying to pass for a long time, probably 10 or 15 years at this point, and it actually has an amazing origin story. This is a bill. It's pretty simple. It's not one of these giant 1,000-page bills. It's pretty simple, but it would have a big impact. The idea of this bill is basically if an agency has a regulation that would have a significant economic effect, and there are a few different definitions of that, but basically a major regulation, they can't just implement it and it takes effect. Instead, they would have to propose it, send it up to Congress, and have a vote, and it would have to pass the House and Senate and be signed by the president. So in other words, the process for imposing regulations would be the legislative process in the Constitution instead of this totally separate process where they more or less do what they want unless you can somehow muster enough votes to stop them and overcome a veto. And it's brilliant in its simplicity. Which is why it didn't come from Washington. It came from a guy in northern Kentucky named Lloyd Rogers, who was pretty angry that his water bill had doubled in the span of a couple of years because of EPA regulations. And he went to his congressman at the time, Jeff Davis, who's since retired. I'll tell you how long we've been working on this bill. And he brought his water bill and he brought his Constitution. And he walks up to him after he says, how is it that the EPA can do this to my water bill when this says Congress is supposed to make all the laws, Article 1, Section 1, all legislative powers. It's like literally the first thing in the Constitution. And his congressman was kind of like, yeah, that shouldn't be the way it works. And he went back to Washington and he had legislative counsel sort of drafted into a bill, and that became the REINS Act. And the original Senate co-sponsor was Jim DeMint, and so we're sort of here in his house. It's fitting.
The House of DeMint,
then when he retired, Rand Paul took it over, and Rand Paul's still the lead Senate sponsor. The House has handed it off through several sponsors over the year. It's in the current Congress. It's sponsored by Kat Cammack of Florida, and it passed the House on an almost party line vote. Every Republican voted for it, and one Democrat, Jared Golden from Maine, who likes to be the one Democrat on votes. He's from the part of Maine that's not Portland, where like everyone hunts bears and stuff, and it's a swing district. So. We've passed this basically since that original encounter back, I want to say 10 or 15 years ago. I don't even remember the exact year. We've basically passed it every time the Republicans have controlled the House in the House. We've still never had a Senate vote on it. And it's disappointing that Democrats have made this a partisan thing. You would think that legislators would like the idea of voting on stuff, of having power, of not sort of punting to the bureaucrats. But they don't. They like it better to pass broad, vague laws and punt to the bureaucrats because that way they can always claim credit for all the wonderful things they do. And when the details don't quite work out, they can blame someone else. And so it's become a big structural problem. And we've had challenge. Now, the other thing that people always say is even if you
just defined the swamp.
Yeah. The other thing people say about this bill is, well, even if you got it through the Senate someday, no president would sign this because it's a huge reduction in presidential power if they have to get Congress to approve all their regulations. But in 2016, we actually surveyed every presidential candidate. None of the Democrats responded to us, but all the Republicans did, and they all said they would sign it. So we're going to do that again for 2024, and I'm pretty optimistic that we'll get that commitment again, and someday we'll get this done. But the floor debate this year was incredible because, one of the parts of the floor debate that was new this time was all the regulations that happened during COVID because we hadn't had them in the past. So that was the Democrats had the House, and so the floor debate, you had people like Chip Royer saying all these crazy COVID regulations, we never voted on them, and the top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, because this is a Judiciary Committee bill because it's like a process reform and the Constitution, that kind of thing. Jerry Nadler comes down and he says, this is why this bill is such a terrible idea. Because it's child abuse not to mask 2-year-olds during a pandemic, and we wouldn't be able to get the votes in Congress to approve that, but you need to have that regulation.
Oh my God. You need to have mask mandates.
It's child abuse not to mask up 2 years.
I think that's like the literal verbatim quote that he said. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Which, by the way, basically no other country in the world did that besides the United States. I think South Korea and I think Canada had it on for age 2 to 5 for like a few months, and then they raised it to age 6. But basically nowhere else in the world. Well, Europe never did it. I mean, it was nobody, because even if you think masks work, and that's a whole other topic, and I think they do very little even for adults, but even if you think they work, what kid can do it properly at age 2? I mean, it's like, what?
They can't keep it on.
There's like no chance.
Right. I mean, our own experience was our daughter had just turned 2, and we were
on an airplane.
We airplane. Thankfully, only once out of all the times we flew did we have a flight attendant that was like, "You have to keep the mask on." Most of the flight attendants were like, "We get it," so they weren't jerks about it. We were at the Native American Museum here in D.C., just doing the tourist thing. We could not keep the mask on her because she just wouldn't wear it. We got kicked out of the museum.
Unbelievable.
I was just like...
So anyway, I actually think we now have a better argument for the REINS Act than ever before, thanks to Democrat Jerry Nadler, who tells us that if the REINS Act passed, they would not be able to get the mask mandates on 2-year-olds because approving that in Congress would be too hard.
Amazing.
Parents of the United States rejoice.
Yes. So that's a big deal. What tell us about? So American Commitment's been involved in really, really important work on trying to decouple or at least expose this unholy alliance between AARP and the insurance industry to the detriment of seniors.
Yeah, it's interesting. When AARP, and by the way, it officially stands for nothing. People think it stands for American Association of Retired Persons, but sometime in the 90s they came out and said, no, it doesn't stand for that anymore. No, it's just, it stands for nothing, which I think is, beautiful. It's perfect. When they originally did their insurance endorsement deal, and I think it was with Prudential or somebody who's not even in health insurance anymore back in the 90s, the New York Times had this brilliant editorial, really prophetic, that was like, they're going to be corrupted by this. They're going to advance the interests of their corporate partners. They're not going to represent seniors anymore. And they were completely right. That's exactly what's happened. And of course, for some time now, their exclusive deal has been with United Health, the largest health insurance company in the country. And if somebody buys a United Health Medicare Part D plan or Medicare Advantage plan or Medigap plan, 5% of the monthly premiums every month forever get skimmed off the top and go to AARP. And wow. The genius of this arrangement, they have great lawyers, and they've been sued on this and won. So they knew what they were doing when they set it up.
What a great racket if you can have it.
They call it a royalty. So it's not a commission. If it were a commission, they'd be regulated by state insurance laws and all this. They don't sell insurance. United Health sells insurance, but they pay us for our intellectual property. They license the name AARP to put it on there, and that's worth 5% of the premiums every month forever. And so they used to disclose the exact number, but they stopped about 5 years ago. But they get Chris Jacobs, who does the annual analysis of their financials for us from Juniper Research, says that it's over $800 million a year that they get from United Health, which is more than triple what they get from their membership dues.
That's insane.
Now, and by the way, think about what that means for United Health, because that's the 5% skim. They're getting 20x that in their gross revenue, their gross monthly, in their premiums. So this is big bit. We're talking $16 billion for United Health, and they get their 5% piece. And that's in the business world. That's good. That's big. There are a lot of billion-dollar a year businesses, but that's, it's no joke. But in the political world, I mean, the year that you were like the biggest man in money politics or whatever,
the Prince of Dark.
Yeah, the year that you were the prince, I don't think you had that much money.
I didn't have
They
800
have that every
million.
year. They have that every single year. They have that every single year, and they're not the prince. Nobody calls them the prince of anything, and they spend it in an incredibly lopsided way with the advertising and the events, and they obviously they follow the rules, so they're not saying vote for this candidate, but they're saying this Democrat is the champion of Medicare and all this kind of stuff. And we tracked, they did about 100 members, House and Senate total, that they gave, the loving treatment to last year. One of them was a Republican.
One.
And it was Mike Crapo, whose opponent, I don't even, did he have an opponent?
I don't know.
If he had an opponent, it was not, he was
No
not,
serious
let's say, he was not in great danger.
No.
He was not in great danger. So we've got this situation where they're able to essentially mint money, and a lot of it flows back into politics. And so their advocacy lines up with their corporate partners and with the Democrats. And this is what we saw last year that was so incredible is, every poll, including AARP's own poll that they posted for a while and then pulled down because I think it was embarrassing for them. Every poll shows that the biggest concern that seniors have with healthcare affordability is insurance-related costs, premiums, deductibles, copays. They don't like paying for drugs, but that's down the list. It is not the number one in any poll. To listen to AARP and the Democrats, literally the only thing anyone cared about was drug price. That was
Right.
all wall-to-wall, everything, all the time. They never talked about insurance costs. And AARP, they benefit from high insurance costs.
Yeah.
A high premium, they literally make a percentage of premiums. So they don't want premiums. They literally want premiums higher, not lower, because that's they take a skim.
Absolute perverse incentive.
Yeah, I mean it's a massive. So we actually did this poll recently with McLaughlin, where we asked them to do a big enough poll of older voters, 55 plus, where we'd have a statistically valid subsample of AARP members. And I think we got 700 or so AARP members, and so we've got all the numbers in this poll broken out by overall older voters and AARP members, and there's not much difference between the two. They all think it's a conflict of interest. They all think there should be stronger disclosure. I think 95% said there should be stronger disclosure of that, of where their money comes from and that business relationship. And so this is a fertile area for Republican politicians to bang the drum and point this out. And the other thing that we found in our poll that was actually pretty encouraging is, only 14% of seniors believe that the Inflation Reduction Act will reduce what they pay for drugs, and 80% think it's going to result in fewer new drugs being developed and offered in Medicare. So the arguments that we have been making are definitely penetrating.
Yeah.
And we just need to convince our candidates that, like, it's not like, they said healthcare, I need to run and hide. Like, they got to go on offense on this. And in particular, I think where there's a huge opportunity is to rerun a lot of the same arguments that we used in 2010 when they rated Medicare spending as a pay-for Obamacare, because in the Inflation Reduction Act, it was actually even worse than that. They rated Medicare prescription drug spending. They took about $280 billion out of Medicare prescription drug spending, and they didn't even spend it on healthcare. I mean, a little bit went to expanded Obamacare subsidies, but almost all of it went to like green energy giveaways.
Yeah.
So they're taking taking hundreds of billions of dollars out of Medicare drug spending, and they're not using it to shore up Medicare. They're not saying, we're going to keep it in Medicare. They're using it for, like, subsidies for rich guys to have an electric car and, the wind and all of this stuff.
Right.
So, I mean, I think we got 90% of seniors said they're concerned about that in our poll. So I think that we've got a huge political opportunity for Republicans to be really aggressive on this theme of, they took money that was supposed to be for Medicare prescription drugs and they gave it to their green energy cronies. But I also think there's a big business opportunity here too for groups like 60 Plus and AMAC and other conservative senior groups that have the same sorts of offerings as AARP to really point out, when you buy an AARP branded product, you're funding an organization that's out there helping Democrats and advancing policies that don't benefit you, that benefit them.
Right. Unbelievable. Well, and AARP, you could do a campaign to AARP members that said, dump your membership, but that wouldn't even have that much impact because the membership
you need them to buy different.
They need to buy different insurance, right?
You need them not to buy the AARP insurance plans, and For Part D, there was a thing in the Wall Street Journal a couple of months ago. For Part D, the ARP plan is literally the most expensive Medicare Part D plan.
Wow.
So, one of the challenges is, I think some people, when they're shopping for Medicare-related plans, whether it's Part D or, Medicare Advantage or Medigap, they type in a search on Google or whatever, and it takes them to the ARP site.
It takes them right there.
They might not even, and of course they have an exclusive deal with United Health, so that's all they're going to see. So I think, one of the things here is that they're just so good at marketing that some people, don't even necessarily know that there are a lot of other options.
Right. They may think, oh, that's the option.
They might think that's where you go.
Right. Right.
Well, I mean, the most
God
insulting
knows they got
thing-
100 things in the mail from them.
Yeah, the most insulting thing is when you turn 50 and what happens? Here comes the ARP
Well, their
mailing.
marketing- their
It's
marketing
disgusting.
is,
How do they know?
Their marketing is extremely aggressive.
Yeah.
So
I actually
they're very-
actually
they're
had to
very good.
email them and call.
You're like, please
and
stop.
say-
You're like, please leave me alone.
and have my name taken off the list forever, which is an ordeal. You actually have to email and call because of their corruption, which
Yeah.
is
Well,
legendary going back to Hillary Care.
Well, that's so. And this is a fascinating. When you look at, because you and I worked together very closely on the original fighting against the original Obamacare, and it's amazing to me how much the Democrats just jumped right in bed with the health insurance
They
companies.
used to hate them, and now they love them. Yeah. I mean, they and since Obamacare, when they made their deal and they mandated and all of that, they never complain. They never have a problem with the insurance industry. Like, oh, you want more subsidies? Here, more subsidies. I mean, during COVID, excuse me, they lifted the ceiling on subsidy eligibility. It was 400% of the federal poverty level. Now there is no limit. There's no income limit. It just depends. If the percentage of your income is below if the premium would cost more than whatever the percentage of your income is, I think it's 9% or whatever, you get the subsidies. So if you're in a place that has insane over the top premium, the taxpayers will pick them up no matter what your income is. And we tried to end that or let it end when the COVID stuff rolled off. And that was one of the things they put in that bill last year in the Inflation Reduction Act, is they did a 3-year extension of the no income limits for Obamacare subsidies. So that was sort of like the direct giveaway to the insurance industry.
Yeah.
So I guess you could say some of the money stayed in healthcare outside of Medicare. It went to Obamacare subsidies, but most of it was the green energy stuff. And by the way, the green energy giveaways have already more than their price tag from joint tax and CBO has already more than doubled. It hasn't been a year since the bill passed.
Oh my
the
gosh.
price tag is already more than doubled.
And so
Because there's no limit, because they do it through the tax code, right? It's, you do the qualifying activity, you get the money.
Oh,
so
my gosh.
they can guess how much of the qualifying activity, but it's not like where you do it as a spending program and there's a budget amount. So it's...
Well, and this would be, so this is a situation like Tesla just announced a deal with Ford and with GM to use the superchargers.
Yeah.
Tesla's now going to be able to take advantage of those tax credits on the charging side, right?
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah,
I would think so.
So
And remember also that Manchin made this big point of the domestic sourcing requirements, that I won't vote for the bill unless you have domestic sourcing requirements. We're not going to subsidize foreign-made EVs and all this kind of thing. And then, of course, the Biden administration came out and they said, well, the sourcing rules apply if you buy the car. But if you lease the car, then the leasing company can get the full credit and pass it on to you, and that sourcing doesn't matter. And by the way, the ambassador from South Korea took credit for that. He said, I don't worry.
I came up with that
Yeah,
idea.
he came out and he said, Honda and Kia, don't worry, they're gonna get it. They'll just lease them all. They're gonna get the full subsidy. By the way, I don't know if it would be worse if he actually did convince them or not. I mean, I don't know, but I think it was hilarious that he was like, "Yeah, no, I got that done."
yeah.
That was all me.
How do we want this to play out, right? So what would you say as you look at the landscape, policy-wise, political, what are the big things coming down the pike? Like, what do we need to be thinking about or worrying about over the next couple of years?
Well, we've obviously got big fiscal challenges at the federal level, and I don't think the bill they just passed is going to do much of anything to address that, and so that's going to continue to be a big problem. I think the regulatory costs are, again, pretty out of control. We had sort of a pause. Trump, for all his talk about how he was going to roll back and actually cut regulate, he didn't quite do that, but he sort of flatlined it for 4 years. Now we've got actually Casey Mulligan from the University of Chicago just did a paper for Committee to Unleash Prosperity, which is the other group I work with. Biden's averaging $5,000 per household per year in new regulatory costs.
My goodness.
So he's actually worse than Obama, which is hard to do.
Yeah.
I was unaware that he was worse than Obama. So that's pretty incredible. So that we've got to do something. Would love to do the REINS Act. I think it'd be very hard still in the Senate, even after this next election, even if it goes well. But we've got to get a handle on regulatory costs. But I really think that most of the action for the next few years is not going to be in Washington. It's going to be in the states. And we were talking before we went on air about kind of the school choice revolution that we're seeing, which I think is probably going to be the most lasting positive legacy of the COVID years, is that the backlash against the closures and the unions has led to universal school choice now in something like 8 or 10 states. And
you just see that accelerating?
I think so. Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is I kind of assumed that we'd see it at least directionally everywhere. I thought it would be slower in the blue states, but I thought directionally everyone would move towards that because of how much dissatisfaction we've had with the public schools, and that actually hasn't happened. The most liberal states have actually moved in the other direction. So Illinois actually killed their school choice program, which I think it had about 9,000 kids in it. It was only for low income, and it was only in where the school districts were failing. It was a pretty small program. Pretty shameless. You have to be pretty shameless to kill a program like that, but they did. And in New York, where the governor is actually pretty good on school choice, shockingly, because she's pretty bad on everything else, she actually lost a fight with the state legislature on capping charter schools. And so New York now has a cap that no more than 50% of the enrolled population in a given school district can be in charters. And there's only one district in the entire state that was anywhere near 50%, and it was actually over 50%, and it's in Harlem, where the public schools are horrific, and there have been some really good innovative charter schools that have incredibly good performance, and so they were attracting huge numbers of kids, and I think they were at 52 or 53% and rising fast. And now tough. I mean, if you're not already in a charter in Harlem, you're frozen out.
You're locked out.
So we've seen, I think, this kind of this divergence where you've got these massive expansions that I'm really excited about in Arizona and Iowa, Indiana, Florida. Georgia couldn't quite get it done. They're going to try again next year. Texas might try in a special session. But you've got Illinois and New York, which always seem to try to be wrong on everything, not just not moving forward, but actually moving backward. And we just had a huge disappointment in Nevada also, where you had a Republican governor. They had a tiny school choice program in Nevada. It started about 5 or 10 years ago, and it's one of these tax credit programs where basically companies can get dollar for dollar off their taxes if they donate to the scholarship fund, and then the scholarships are given out to low-income kids for private schools. They only had $7 million a year in this program in Nevada, which covered about 2,000 kids tuition. And the governor, in his proposed budget, wanted to increase it to $50 million, so it would have been pretty big expansion. It would have probably gone from 2,000 kids to 10 or 15,000 kids. And the Democrat legislature not only rejected that proposal, but they zeroed it out. So the existing program is going to, unless there's some surprise, and I think they've adjourned now, so I don't think there's going to be, unless those 2,000 kids can somehow find, donors who don't. Maybe the donors will stick with it even without the tax credit. I hope they do. But basically, that program was killed. And so we've got this incredible momentum in a lot of places, but then you've got sort of, cross-cutting the places where the Democrats still have enough power. They're definitely fighting tooth and nail, even if it literally means taking, a school away from a kid who's already there in some of these places, low-income kids. And so, but I've been amazed. I think these programs are going to work really well. I mean, nothing's perfect, but I think they're going to work really well. And I'm really optimistic about that. And of course, we've had a lot of tax cutting in the states also. And I think that the federal capping of the SALT deduction in the Trump tax cuts is just a huge positive structural change that kicked tax reform into high gear in the states that have
Really high taxes,
Republican and even some Democrats. So Connecticut cut taxes this year with a Democrat legislature and governor, which was a little bit surprising. Not the best tax cut because they didn't touch the top marginal rate. They cut sort of one of the intermediate ones. So they're not going to get a huge supply side effect from that, but it's still pretty interesting. And between the tax environments post the Trump tax cuts and what happened during COVID with the lockdowns, we've just had massive numbers of people moving with their feet.
Yeah.
You probably have a lot of new neighbors who fled some of these blue states, and to me that's like no pun intended. That's like the Trump card. I mean, the liberals cannot win debates about which model is best when people are stampeding out of the states they control,
right,
and into the states that have more conservative policies. And you got Newsom out there saying, I'll debate DeSantis anytime. And by the way, I don't know if you saw DeSantis' response was great. He was like, if you want to run. Like announce you're running against Biden. Like you don't get to
pretend.
Right. He's like, so I thought that was a good response. But I mean, you look at.
I did not see that.
Yeah, it's good, right?
Because all of a sudden he was on every channel, challenging DeSantis. I'm like, what the heck?
Yeah. It's not how this works. You don't get to
You're not the front runner of anything, so you don't get to challenge him to anything.
But I mean, California's lost 800,000 residents in between 2020 and 2022. If you look at the census numbers, I mean, if that continues through the end of the decade, and it's hard to believe that it will, but maybe they'll lose 5 congressional
seats.
I
was going to say they're going to lose multiple.
If it stays, if the stampede stays the way it's been for 2 years through the end, it'll be 5. I think it'll probably end up being more like 2 or 3 because, I don't know if people can move that fast. I don't know, but we'll see what. But that was the other thing DeSantis said is he said that California had never lost population under any governor in its history until the current governor.
That's right.
DeSantis. If somebody just throws a jab, he throws a haymaker. And it's always based on fact.
Yeah, and you look at where people are going. It's basically. It's basically states that all the destination states at least have a Republican legislature. A couple have Democrat governors like North Carolina and unfortunately now Arizona. But people are going to states where they have low tax rates and where they weren't subject to lockdowns. And the big argument, one of the big arguments that blue areas always had was, well, our schools are so wonderful and they're the best. And I don't think they have that anymore.
Right. Because
after all the lockdowns and how angry people, and especially if the red states increasingly have, robust school choice programs, then you can find a school that works for you if the public school doesn't.
Right. Wow, that's big stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the debt limit. We've had multiple conversations over the last few weeks with folks. I've been of the opinion that Biden started with, I want a clean debt ceiling vote, period. He didn't get that. So we won something. There's been, Russ Vogt, Andy Biggs, both argued that, it wasn't great. They're still, and they've made pretty compelling arguments.
The thing that really bothered me, there were a lot of areas where it fell short, and especially because Limit Save Grow was so good. I think it sort of got our expectations higher than they should have been about what a bill might actually look like. But to me, the most unforgivable thing is that somehow they ended up giving so much ground on the work requirements that they net weakened them rather than strengthening them. And when the CBO score came out, it said that there would be more people on food stamps under this bill than under current law. I guess it is current law now, but as it existed before. That was pretty shocking. When you started with a bill that had, pretty robust work requirements on cash welfare, on housing, on Medicaid, and on food stamps, and you ended up only making changes to food stamps, and the changes on net weakened work requirements. And that was crazy to me because that's such a winning issue.
Yeah.
We had the same day that Democrats were winning the state Supreme Court in Wisconsin, there was a ballot question on work requirements. It got 79%.
Wow.
Okay?
Wow.
people think that if you are an able-bodied working age adult and you're on public assistance, you should have to work. I mean, that is a total winner.
Yeah.
A total winner. And somehow they bought into this idea from the Democrats that, it's mean to impose work requirements, so we have to exempt veterans and we have to exempt homeless people and all this kind of stuff. And there was the wrong way to think about it. It's not like veterans served our country, so we're going to reward them by exempting them from work requirements, which is what Democrats asked for and got in this bill. What they should have said is work requirements help the beneficiaries of assistance programs. They help them get off the program.
Right.
They help them get onto the ladder of economic opportunity. They're beneficial not just for the taxpayers who save money, but they're beneficial for the program participants themselves.
Right.
And we should have said we owe it to veterans to impose work requirements,
Right.
not to exempt them.
To help them lift themselves
The ones
up.
who are disabled are exempt because they're disabled. But if you're able-bodied, you should have to work or be in a certified job training program. So I actually think they fell into a trap of assuming that the work requirements were something mean or mean-spirited that was being imposed on people, which of course is the way the media covered it. But once they fell into that trap, then they could put these categorical exemptions in, and it ended up cutting the wrong way. And that should have been a huge winning issue that they could have stuck to their guns and got something big on. And instead, so that was particularly disappointing. I do think but also I just don't think this bill's really going to cut any spending. I think it's going to be pretty close to flat at 2023 after the gimmicks are in. So that was kind of disappointing too. Remember, we had this huge increase, this huge sort of bolus of spending from COVID, and we should be coming down pretty sharply to get at least back to trend, and we're not really going to do that with this. There are two gimmicks in this bill that are pretty egregious. One is that the $20 billion that they take out of the IRS enforcement 87,000 agent fund, which I'm all for doing that. We should have got more than that.
Right.
But they did that in a side deal, so that's not going to count for the cap.
Oh.
So that's going to be additional spending on top of the cap.
Oh my gosh.
So that sort of makes the cap number deceptive. And then the other thing they did is, they originally said, there was about $6 trillion of COVID spending. At the beginning of the year, when they talked about the cuts that they were going to ask for in debt ceiling, the House Budget Committee identified $100 billion that was still unspent from COVID that they said they were going to rescind. By the time they did Limit Save Go, I think it was down to 60 or so. And then they did this negotiation, and they walked out, and they said, we rescinded $28 billion of unspent COVID money. This is the largest rescission in history. But then you look at the bill, and they actually stashed 22 of the $28 billion in like this random account over at the Commerce Department, like the facilities account. And so they really only rescinded $6 billion because, of course, they're going to redesignate that funds and spend it on something else. And so... I asked leadership staff, because I didn't get that it was the COVID money when I read the bill. I was like, why is this random account I never heard of getting $22 billion? And I looked the account up, and it had $20 million last year, and it's for maintaining their computer systems or whatever. And I'm like, well, how do you have a 10,000% increase in the funding in an account? What is happening here? So I emailed someone on the Hill. I was like, what is this about? This thing, and then the guy's like, call me. So I call him, and he was like, oh yeah, that's the COVID money. We stash it in there, but we didn't promise to spend it. We might still rescind it later. We might not spend. I'm like, okay, yeah, right. All right. So I think between those couple of gimmicks, I don't think there really is going to be much actual cut in the non-defense discretionary. But to your point, they wanted a blank check. They didn't want to negotiate at all. We've reestablished the principle that if you're going to ask the American people to take on more debt, you've got to do something about spending. You've got to have some kind of plan. And, some caps are better than no caps because at least you're not going to just have appropriators gone wild. Although, I do worry that they might do another massive defense supplemental and blow up everything on the defense side also because, of course, both parties love doing those. But I hope I hope that they'll stick to it, and it's something. And, look, you can't. I think it's very hard to get a huge win when the other party has the White House and the Senate.
Yeah,
so
and you have a 4-seat majority.
Yeah, that's the other thing is, you have to be able to actually agree on this stuff. So, I thought Limit Save Grow was great. I wish that had been the final bill. But I thought this bill was pretty bad, but I'm not sure we could have hoped for better.
Right.
Do you think the 1% cuts at the end of the year?
I don't think it'll happen. I don't think there's any scenario where it happens. I mean, I think they'll do an omni that because the way they did it, Democrats are smart. If they'd the way to do it that would have actually been good for us would have been the appropriations bills that are not passed get a 1% cut. But that's not what they did. What they did is if any of the appropriations bills haven't passed, then everything gets a 1% cut. So even if you've cleared the defense bill, you've cleared Milcon VA or whatever, if you haven't done all the appropriations bills, you end up doing a CR, everything gets hit with a 1% cut. Well, Republicans are never going to let defense get hit with a 1% cut. So what's going to happen is whatever's not done, when we get to whatever's not done as its own appropriate is going to get wrapped into an omni. It's just it's inevitable.
Yeah.
So I think Massey, he's smart. He's got to kind of know that, I think. So I think that was more about like Massey needs to have something here for face saving, or this thing dies in rules, and this is something he's been asking for. So this is a version of it we can do. But the way that they wrote it, I mean, I would be shocked. I mean, do you see a scenario where they let a 1%?
Nope.
Yeah. So it's
just to be honest, I don't think it's going to happen.
if they had written it the other way, where it wouldn't have hit defense, then I think they could have happened.
Right. Right.
But Democrats, they're pretty good at this.
Well,
they're pretty good at this.
and
I mean, the fact that they won the food stamp negotiation and ended up with more people on food stamp, I don't.
Well, and it's, as we've said before in previous episodes, that at the end of the day, you have Democrats who want to spend, but you also have a bunch of Republicans, appropriators, who think that their job is to spend. So it's always going to be
and it's not, and of course, you also we have a very large wing of our party that just thinks no amount of defense spending is ever enough.
Right.
And the Democrats have done very well, really going back to Budget Control Act with this idea that, okay, you want to spend $1 on defense, it costs you $2 because you got to give us $1 for non-defense also.
Right.
And that's we've broken parity. So it's not exactly the dollar for dollar thing, but they look for ways to hold defense hostage to get more non-defense.
Yeah.
And, I kind of think we should be able to find plenty of cuts in defense also, like get rid of all the green energy pork that's in there. I mean, there's all, but you've got a lot of people on our side that just will not countenance the idea of defense being cut at all or not growing rapidly. And so I think the Democrats know they can use that to make sure they get all the spending in non-defense too.
Yeah. Well, they've done it effectively now for 30 years.
Right.
Every budget bill that I can remember.
Yeah. Phil Kerpen, American Commitment, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, really great to have you.
Where can people find the study that you did, the survey work?
If you go to AmericanCommitment.org, there's like a slider that rotates at the top there, and one of them says Commitment to Seniors. And if you click on that, you can get the poll and you can get the report on AARP's financials and all the other stuff on that project that way.
Great. Awesome.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you again for being here.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
God bless.